Hello there, it's Joe the CRM chap here with a new video, and today we're going to be looking at how you can start to leverage Power BI alongside the Common Data Service. So the rough sort of agenda for today's video, we'll jump in first of all and take a look at, okay, what is the Common Data Service, or more commonly referred to as CDS? What is it? What's the history? How does it relate to Dynamics 365 as an application? And then we'll walk through some of the existing built-in reporting options that you've got within CDS and why they may or may not be appropriate for your use case. With that sort of out of the way, we'll jump in, take a look at the various different ways in which you can connect up to CDS using Power BI. We'll discuss some of the licensing considerations, the pros and cons of each potential solution, before we then finish off with just some closing remarks from me about things to sort of bear in mind and my own sort of recommendations on the best way to sort of move forward with things. So about me, I am a director and co-founder of a small gold partner consultancy firm based in the UK. So we do a lot of work with Dynamics 365, the Power Platform, Azure, bespoke application development. If it's Microsoft and it's Microsoft Cloud, chances are we probably do it. I've got hold quite a few different certifications, as you can see on here. A little bit obsessed over them, as you can probably imagine, that or just like getting the shiny badges. So I've worked with Dynamics 365 and the successor product, the Power Platform, for a number of years now. I've got a firm background working with a lot of Microsoft technology, core Microsoft technologies. More recently, I do a lot more around sort of project management, which explains the Prince 2. Scrum Master, Agile is a very big thing for us at the moment. Agile and DevOps are huge things for us. And then finally, I'm also involved as part of the official user group, Dynamics 365 and CRM user group. We've got meetings fairly regularly happening in the Manchester area. Our next one, our first ever virtual event, because of the obvious things around coronavirus and stuff like that, is actually taking place at the end of April. So if you want to find out more about that, then feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or drop me an email. So I'd be love to talk to you more about it. Okay, so what is the Common Data Service then? So it's been around for about 4 years now. It was released around the same time as Power Apps, which is basically like a business applications development tool, lets you very quickly build bespoke and potentially highly customizable business applications that you can use within your business. So, and really the core aim with CDS is to give you a central storage or database that you can use for all of your core business data, with the additional benefit being is that you can then easily integrate this alongside other tools within the Power Platform, which we'll touch upon in a few minutes. It's a cloud-only product. You cannot get this on premise. Some of the features that it's got as part of it, you can create various different entities or tables if you're coming from a database background point of view. These entities can have various different fields of different types. So if it's a currency or a date and time, you need to have a calculated field. Okay, so look at all these records on here, these related records on here, and do me a roll up to show me, okay, how much money have we made? Based on that, you can do all these sort of things. You've got the ability of being able to automate your business logic using tools such as business rules. And in short, it gives you a really powerful and highly customizable way of being able to not just create your application, but also model your security around it as well. Make sure that users can only see and work with the data that they need to, and then link that back to common identity objects such as Azure AD and things like that. So really, when I describe it to people, really the term SQL Server on steroids sort of comes to mind. It gives you all the good stuff that you'd expect, when having a SQL database, but gives you just so much more on top of it. Stuff that typically you would have to go away and develop bespoke. With CDS, you can sort of cut all that out, and you've got all the benefits of SQL plus so much more on top. So typically where SQL Server on Azure might be a little bit cheaper, perhaps in comparison to CDS, potentially the benefits of what CDS can bring on top of that more than make up for it. And in terms of the application's history, so initially when it was first released, it went through the initial version was quite sort of different. You then had version 2 come out, which sort of saw a really major overhaul of how the solution was built out and ultimately what underlying technology it was using. And we'll go into a bit more detail in a minute in terms of, okay, what that actually meant, when they released version 2. So in terms of where CDS sits within the Power Platform, this diagram really summarizes it better than I can ever really sort of describe. So you've got all of these tools sitting on top of CDS. So Power BI, which we're obviously going to be coming on to a little bit shorter in a little bit of time. Power Apps, our application development tool, being able to automate things using Power Automate. This was previously known as Microsoft Flow. And then a new one into the sort of the family, the Power Platform family, is Power Virtual Agents, being able to build intelligent bots that can then be deployed onto your website, manage communications with your customer, and again, automate key tasks. So you're not having to have somebody sat in front of a computer responding to your customers. You can get your bots sort of do that. And common data services underneath that. And as well as that, you've got across the whole of these different products a wide variety of different data connectors. You can connect to multiple different data sources. You're not just limited to common data service. The platform is fairly agnostic from that standpoint. And as well as Power Virtual Agents, you've got really effective and powerful AI capabilities built underneath. So whether it's a case of you wanting to scan business cards and automatically detect and pull information into your common data service database, image detection, all sorts of really great AI functionality is built in the platform, and that's using Azure behind the scenes in order to power all that. So in short, a really great platform to help you build out not just your internal business applications, but also maybe ones that you are developing for your customers as well. So how does Dynamics 365 relate to all of this? Well, I guess you could sort of say it's perhaps maybe the sort of the awkward bedfellow. It's sort of sitting alongside Dynamics 365. Originally, when CDS came out, it was completely separate. You had sort of some capabilities within there to sort of get both Dynamics 365 and CDS talking to each other, but really they were, from a technical standpoint, completely separate. When version 2 came out, this basically just dealt with this by sort of saying, okay, Dynamics 365, it's got this database, it's got all of this rich functionality that's been developed over time as part of Dynamics CRM. Let's just use that instead. And as part of that, I guess Microsoft was sort of recognizing, okay, well, perhaps maybe with CDS version 1, we're building something that we've already got. So perhaps maybe a similar situation like this happened at Microsoft where, yeah, essentially building the same thing, different silos. Okay, let's consolidate that. Let's use one thing moving forward. And most importantly, let's leverage what we've got as part of the history within Dynamics 365, Dynamics CRM. So what I would say is that if you hear people talking about Dynamics 365 database and the CDS database, they are the same thing. The terms may be used interchangeably. Just keep that in mind when you're sort of doing your research or looking for potential solutions to problems. You might just need to just adjust your terms correctly. At the moment, if you were previously on version 1 of CDS, you should have been migrated across to version 2. That was something that happened quite a while ago, I believe. And when you look at it, okay, fine, a little bit of sort of upheaval and a little bit of sort of like, okay, having to, okay, go from migrate from my version 1 into version 2. Okay, fine, a little bit annoying, but the decision to use the Dynamics 365 database for version 2 of CDS is a very good decision. For the reasons I've already said, it gives you access to all of this great functionality that's been developed over the years, and you're simplifying the whole platform by sort of using that as well. So what I would say as part of all of this is that having an awareness of the background around Dynamics CRM, what reporting options that you had, and as we'll see, still have in the application, understanding that is really important because it helps to inform, okay, well, do I necessarily need Power BI as part of my solution? Can I use these other options? And okay, well, what options have I got within Power BI to access Dynamics CDS or Dynamics 365 data? In short, having an awareness of what's come before can help you to inform that, and it's really useful to sort of know. So with that in mind, let's do a bit of a history lesson. So a long time ago, feels like quite a long time ago now, probably around 2012, 2013, what was going on in the world? So in the UK, we just had the Olympics, really great event, the whole world on show, everyone coming out excited, a fantastic sort of a time period for us in the UK. Around that time, Slack was released as well. Slack was quite popular. That logo as well was obviously something that people quite liked when it was first released. And we had this little fellow here who was keeping himself busy on The Apprentice, not really troubling people above and beyond that. So really everything was good with the world. We were all feeling happy. Everything was great. From a technology standpoint, we had at the time Dynamics CRM 2013 as a on-premise and also online customer relationship management system. And at the time, Microsoft developing a little something called Project Crescent, which we'll go back to shortly. But you can sort of see, looking at the interface, it's got that Office 2010 look and feel to it. It's obviously, shows its age quite a bit. So when we focus a little bit more in terms of on Dynamics CRM 2013, what reporting options have we got in there or had in there? We have the ability in there to create charts. So this gives us the ability to have really, achieve basic visualization capability. So we could have pie, line, bar charts. We have the ability to be able to customize these further by exporting out the definitions and tinkering about with them. We had the ability to be able to develop these reports. So this was utilizing SQL Server reporting services under the hood to power this. So people who are familiar with developing these type of reports could very quickly build out, highly bespoke reports that could then be uploaded and then utilized from within the application. In terms of other things that you had, views, so being able to generate lists of your data, being able to sort that data, apply little filters onto there, adjust the order of the columns, do all sorts of really cool things like that. And then finally, the thing that brought it all together from a dynamic CRM reporting standpoint was a dashboard. And this is where you could take pretty much all of the components that I talked about previously, apart from reports, get them into a centralized view, tinker about with them, adjust them and things like that, and then use that as your central reporting hub within the application. And the best thing about all of this is that you didn't necessarily need to be a application administrator to create these. Provided you have the appropriate permissions, you could create personal versions of these, just for your own consumption. Maybe you would then share this out to somebody else, or to a team or to another user, things like that. But essentially, there was no barrier. Anybody in the application could use these, which was really great. So we fast forward to today, and what's going on in the world. Well, the fellow I talked about earlier has sort of graduated onto sort of bigger and better things. He's keeping us all either amused or frustrated on a daily basis now. So that's not too great. Slack very recently had a bit of a rebrand with their logo and their icon. This got quite a bit of slack, no pun intended, at the time. I quite like it for what it's worth, but yeah, people were quite upset about this. And at the moment, we've got this whole coronavirus thing, which is obviously sort of, bearing down on us at the moment. So if there's one thing that you take away from today's video is make sure you wash your hands all the time, particularly to help prevent the spread of that. So when we move ahead and think about, on the flip side of things, if we start looking at, okay, what's happening from a technology standpoint, we've now got a sort of newer version of Dynamics CRM. It's not actually called that anymore. As we mentioned earlier, it's called Dynamics 365 with CDS under the hood. And Project Crescent has sort of developed and moved on and is now what we call Power BI. And really, the journey for Power BI has been quite sort of phenomenal, really seeing how it's sort of developed. It's now got its own dedicated user groups. It's being utilized by some of the largest companies in the organization. It's quite impressive to see how far it's come as a product over quite a short period of time, really, when you think about it. So when we have a look at, okay, what have we got from a reporting standpoint in Dynamics 365 and CDS? Well, really, nothing's changed. The same options that we talked about earlier in Dynamics CRM 2013, they're still there today. So that does raise a fairly obvious question in terms of, okay, well, how can we get Power BI to fit in? Does Power BI fit in at all? Do we actually need to consider having Power BI in the equation if we're just wanting to do simple reports off the back of CDS? Well, I think the Power Platform changes this, and obviously we talked about it a little bit already in terms of what it can do and what products sort of sit within there. But really, the sort of the key takeaways from that is that as we may have sort of alluded to already, what was traditionally the Dynamics 365 application is now in effect a Power App. It's a type of Power App. It's a model-driven Power App that's sitting on top of the Common Data Service. Effectively just a premium app that you can just buy and start using to achieve a particular purpose, whether it's for sales, service, field service, or project service, or whatever. Alongside that, the customization experience for Dynamics 365, that is gradually moving across into a new experience, a new interface, the Power Apps portal. So that's sort of happening quite slowly. By the end of this year or start of next year, that will all be migrated across completely. So from a customization standpoint, when we're building out solutions involving Dynamics 365 and the CDS, we're using Power Apps to achieve that. And what Microsoft are most importantly saying as part of all these changes is that moving forward, okay, Power BI is the preferred platform to use when you've got reporting requirements, when you need to analyze your data that's sitting in the CDS or elsewhere, perhaps. You need to do the type of things that Dynamics CRM can do natively and still does today. Moving forward, Power BI is going to be the one that's going to have the most investments and is going to be sort of the preferred solution for you to use. So where does this ultimately leave us then? So as we've established already, Dynamics 365's got great reporting options. They do and can cover, a lot of business requirements if they're used correctly. But really, what I would say is that, when you're using them, when you're seeing in terms of how they're being developed moving forward, they're not going to see those investments, as I said already. They've already started to have that sort of legacy feel to them. And really, when we consider in terms of, okay, at the moment you've got full-blown SQL Server reporting services sitting in as part of Dynamics 365, that really does overcomplicate, the whole architecture of Dynamics 365 and CDS. Behind the scenes, having to have a full-blown SQL Server instance sitting alongside that, that potentially overcomplicates things. And really, the question mark with that is, okay, well, over time, if, potentially if Power BI can meet our requirements, why do we need SSRS at all, really? So really, ultimately, whereas previously having a bit of a vague familiarity with Power BI, if you're a Dynamics 365 or CDS developer, having that just vague awareness of it, okay, yeah, it would have helped you along a little bit, but it's not really core essential. Now you're in the territory now where you have to have a good awareness of it. You need to know how you can use Power BI to get the most out of your CDS data. And really, what I would say on the flip side of this, okay, if you're an existing BI developer, if your time is being spent, just with Power BI at the moment, then you need to take note as well, because over time, the expectation is you need to be aware of tools such as Power Apps, Common Data Service, and Power Automate flows, because ultimately that's how you're going to build out a more comprehensive and complete business application solution by bringing all these technologies together. So, I get it, there's potentially a minefield here, lots of different options that we need to consider. And really, when it comes down to, okay, what do I need to actually use to achieve the requirements for the business? It can be difficult, so, and really, it ultimately comes down to asking, I guess, some really core questions in terms of, okay, what do I need to achieve? So, for example, do I need to have it so that my reports are showing instant data from the application, or is it acceptable to have a bit of a delay on data that's being queried out? Is it just CDS data that I'm concerned about? Am I in the ideal situation where I'm just using CDS for everything? No, probably not. There's a good chance it's going to be legacy systems, spreadsheets, maybe other ERP systems, SAP systems, maybe other Dynamics 365 AX or F&O type systems need to bring data in. So really, you need to consider, okay, well, what tool is going to best serve me in helping to bring all this data in? What's the state of your data? Again, are you in an ideal situation where the quality of all your CDS data is absolutely top notch, or you're going to have to be in a situation where you need to model and shape that data to get it into some kind of acceptable um, presentation level for senior stakeholders, executive level people in your organization? How technically capable is your team? This is an important consideration. Are you in a, are you know, have you got really experienced SQL developers? Have you got people who are familiar with Power BI in your team, or are you just purely focused on functional capabilities in Dynamics 365 or CDS? It's really important you need to evaluate, okay, what have I got at our disposal, from a technical capability standpoint, and what solution is going to be the fastest for us to deploy with that in mind. And ultimately, I guess the most important question of all, how much we need to spend in this? How much do you value a really great reporting solution, and how much you're willing to spend to get to that point of view? So when you start to answer these questions, when you start to think about the implications of this, you start to see a potential way in which Power BI can either meet the requirements, or alternatively you just revert back to using some of the tools I've talked about already. So what I would say on this is to think carefully about these type of questions, get an answer to these, and then find the solution that's ultimately going to be best for you. So let's assume then, okay, you've gone through that exercise, you're happy that, yep, Power BI is the tool for us, it's going to meet our requirements. Then how can I actually start using it alongside the Common Data Service? So before we jump into that, it's worth first of all just talking about some of the licensing considerations with Power BI. So at the moment, if you've purchased, let's say, a Dynamics 365 or Power Apps Plan 1, Plan 2 license, you're not going to get Power BI, a paid Power BI subscription included as part of that. Ultimately, you can still get Power BI. You have got a free license that you can use. We'll go back onto why that might not be suitable in a few minutes. But ultimately, you need to have available free licenses or have an administrator on your tenant set you up with free licenses, or alternatively, you're going down a paid route for your Power BI licenses, whether that's professional licenses or whether you are in the very fortunate position where you're able to afford premium capacity and you'd be able to assign that out to a particular workspace or to your free users. So okay, so if you are decided, okay, we're going to use the free Power BI license, okay, yep, that's absolutely fine. But keep in mind, you've got some very specific limitations with this. So, for example, you're not able to share content easily. Content that you produce must be consumed by just you alone. You're not able to then share that out easily to other people. You would have to go through quite a few steps to do that. You're not able to do things like scheduling your data for refresh or things like that. You can't access apps that are made available as part of Microsoft App Source. So there's a pre-built solution out there that you want to use. You're going to have to upscale to professional in order to get to use that. And you've also got limitations around, okay, the size of your Power BI data sets and also how often they can be refreshed as well. So if you've got a particularly large CDS instance, so anything probably over 2 GB or more, you're going to be hit by this limitation fairly early on. So in which case, moving to professional is going to be the best way for you to move forward. Okay, so with that out of the way, then let's take a look at some of the ways in which you can start to consume CDS data using Power BI Online. So first of all, you've got the ability to use some pre-built apps that Microsoft have developed. Now, granted, these are more suited towards a situation where you've got Dynamics 365 in place. So for example, either the sales app or the customer service app, but ultimately these do connect to CDS, these do pull data in from CDS, so they are worth considering. So if you are in the situation where you meet those requirements, or alternatively, you need the ability to be able to analyze how people are using business processes that have been deployed to CDS instance, these ones could be potentially quite useful. Or, if you're in early stage planning for your Power BI solution, you wanting to get stakeholder approval or engagement for rolling Power BI out, these pre-built apps can very quickly let you spin up some really great looking content that you can then use for demonstrations. And, in situations where you've not heavily customized CDS, your Dynamics 365 instance, again, potentially they could meet your requirements as well. So again, worth a look in the early stages if you're just contemplating using Power BI alongside Dynamics 365 in particular. So in terms of what the information it sort of shows you, so this one here is an example from the customer service app dashboard. So as you can see on here, you've got a range of different visuals. So they're really great at showing you all of the different available visualizations that you've got as part of Power BI. You can very quickly get a feel for what you could do if you were to start developing a Power BI report for yourself. And on the right on here, you've got an example of the Process Analyzer app. So in this particular case, the instance that I'm targeting on here doesn't have much data in there, which is why there's only one on there. But potentially, if you're in a situation where you've got many hundreds of different processes executing in your CDS environment, then this can be very useful for allowing you to identify, okay, what's running the most, what's consuming the most system resource. Is there anything here that we need to check potentially? Or even from a compliance standpoint, you want to make sure that people are following a precise business process and detect any violations. Again, this will be really useful for you to use. Sticking with Power BI Online now, another thing that you can use is something called data flows. So they're fairly new on the Power BI scene. What this lets you do is it lets you connect to not just CDS data sources, but also other ones as well. What you do is you connect up, you bring them all into an online Power BI model using Power Query. You fiddle about with it, model, shape the data. Once it's all ready to go, you can then publish that out as effectively a pre-built, ready-to-go data set that other users in the tenant can then start to connect to and use without having to go through the rigmarole themselves of having to, fiddle about with the data. It's just there, ready to go for their purposes. So within data flows, you've got a common data service for apps connector that you can use, fully supported connector. You can bring in all your entities, all your data and things like that. But again, you're going to have to be fairly familiar with Power Query in order to get the most out of this as a solution. And ultimately, as well, you need to have some appreciation for some of the ways in which CDS data, how CDS handles data. We'll go back onto that in a short while to sort of show you some of those quirks. And ultimately, you need a paid subscription as well. This is not something that you can get for free. But potentially, where you've got multiple data sets involved, not just CDS as well, this could be something that could really help you along and get you to a good place. So in terms of setting it up, you would go into the wizard, you select your common data service for apps connector, as you can see on the screen here. give it your details for your instance down there, log in, do all that sort of stuff, then all your various entities are sort of exposed out from there. And you can just select those and start to shape them further. But the best way to sort of see this in action is actually just jump into a quick demo. So we're going to go in now, see the apps that I spoke about earlier, and also have a look at the data flows as well.
Okay, so we're in Power BI online at the moment, app.powerbi.com. We've all logged in. So first of all, let's check out these pre-built apps that we can get access to. So click on apps on the left down here, go to get apps up here. This is going to open up the App Source Center for Power BI. It's going to show me first of all any apps that have been deployed out into my organisation, but we don't particularly want to care about that today. We want to find these particular apps that I've just spoken about a few minutes ago. So if we start searching on here, Dynamics 365, you see we get a few of them starting to crop up on here with some nice new logos as well, which is even better. So I'm going to grab one of these in particular. So I'm going to grab the customer service one. I'm interested in just seeing, okay, how my case management thing's going on at the moment. So click on here, get some details about the app itself, and then I can just do the Get It Now button. It's going to download that into my tenant on that now. It's going to ask me, yep, do I consent to install that? I certainly do. It's going to do that in the background. It should automatically detect that which instance it should connect to, but if not, I will get prompted in a few minutes once it's installed. Okay, so that's all installed, so click on Go to App over here. It's asking me to connect to my data source over here. So just click Don't Show this again for now. So at the moment it's just showing me sample data in here, but what I can do is I can go into my workspace and I can actually update that to my actual live connection if I want to. But the sample data on here gives me a good flavour in terms of what information is coming back. I can see all the different visualizations that are sort of on offer as part of this, which is really good. I can click down here and view some additional detail. It's like summary, agent, report details, etc. So it gives me a really nice pre-built, ready-to-go application that I can start to use if I'm using the customer service app that's sitting on top of Dynamics 365 or the CDS. Okay, so that's just an example there in terms of how you can get access to the pre-built apps on there. So now I want to actually start working with data flows. I want to actually build a data flow that brings in my CDS data down here. So what I've done first of all is I've gone into my workspace, I've created a D365 CE workspace down here, gone into here, I can then just select data flows at the top right down here. I've got a few sample ones that I built out already down here. Click on the create button, go to data flow. I don't want to recover from cache, no thank you. So at this point it's asking me, okay, have I got an existing model I want to import, or do I want to define some new entities or data sources that I want to use? Well, I want to define some new entities. So in which case I want to go into here. It's going to show me all the data sources I can connect up to. I've got some pre-built templates I can use that connect to not just Dynamics 365 but also Salesforce as well. But what I'm going to do is going to select Common Data Service down here in the Power Platform. I'm going to pop in my tenant URL if I can remember it. I should be able to. It's detected I'm already signed in. It's an organisational account I need to use, so I'm just going to click on Next over here. It's asking me to sign in again, so I'm just going to sign in again on this other window. Okay, all signed in. Let's click on Next. Okay, the credentials must have been expired. So now I get two folders on here. So you want to ignore the system folder. The data that you return from the entities that are listed in here are going to need some additional work to get them compiled together, so just ignore that folder. Instead you're going to want to go into entities down here. So I'm just going to select a few of the entities that I want to work with. So in this case account, I want to work with the contact, I want to do the lead as well. Just grab those three entities, and now I want to click on the transform data button down here. At this point it's going to load me a Power Query editor window in the browser, and then through here it's going to load some sample of my data on here. I can then start to basically mess around with this data, shape it, maybe remove a few different fields and things like that. So already through here we can start to see some of the things that how data types within CDS sort of work. So for example, we can see we've got an option set field on here. It returns me both the underlying option set value, which is an integer value, alongside the display value, a friendly label effectively. We've got the ID, the globally unique identifier for our account ID. We've got address fields. We've got all the different fields on here, the different types. Now, in some cases on here, it's done a good job on here detecting the various different data types, which is quite good. So let's just assume at this point, okay, I don't need to do any additional work on this data on here. This is sort of ready to go. I want to start publishing this out. So click on save and close it over here. Excuse me. Just going to validate the queries to make sure they're all good. Okay, give this a name, so I'll just call this CDS talk. Click save down there. Okay, so this has now been saved on now, and then what I can do is I need to then configure a refresh schedule. So basically Power BI will then go out and query the data there and basically synchronize that out every so often. So what I need to do is just close that down because I didn't click on there fast enough. I just want to go onto my settings over here, I think it is. And then down here I can just specify my scheduled refresh settings. So in this case I'll just sort of say daily. I can just add on a time, so let's say 9 AM every day. I want to refresh this at 9 AM. Click apply down there, and then that will basically start refreshing at the times that I've indicated. But now what I've got on there is a pre-built, ready to go data flow that other users on the tenant in the workspace can connect to. It's got all my data on there. It's been ideally prepared and it's been curated so that people don't need to do any additional work to it. They can just use it straight away to start building out the reports. That's how you set up a data flow from start to finish.
Okay, so we've seen what we can do within Power BI Online, but the other side of Power BI involves the desktop application, which is where probably you will spend most of your time when building out, bespoke Power BI reports. Let's take a look at some of the ways in which Common Data Service can be connected to from within there. So as we've seen with data flows, you've also got as well in Power BI Desktop a dedicated pre-built connector ready to go, the Common Data Service for Apps connector. This replaces some of the older connectors that were originally targeting Dynamics 365, and this should really be your go-to connector. It's quick and easy to use. It's got some really nice options to help you along, which we'll sort of see in a little short while. You don't necessarily need to have Power BI Professional as well. You've got full access to CDS data. The only slight niggle with it though is that when it comes to working with related entity data, there's a little bit of extra work that you need to do there. It's not just going to be a simple case of, okay, I want to bring in, so I've got a related account record to my account. I want to grab the first name of that contact and show it on my account entity. That's not necessarily going to have to be straightforward, and we'll sort of see what you have to do a little bit further along. But really, I would say if you're just getting started out, you're not wanting to do anything particularly complex, use this connector. It's going to be really, it's going to help you along, in a great way. Moving on from there, for potentially more advanced requirements, so if you have been working with Dynamics 365 for a long period of time, maybe you're moving from Dynamics CRM into CDS Online, you're moving your data into there, then potentially this option could be quite a good one if you've built up quite a collection of FETCHXML queries. What is FETCHXML? FETCHXML is the sort of traditional reporting language that you would use when building out reports targeting Dynamics CRM and Dynamics 365. It's basically like SQL, but in XML. Instead, it's got most of the same type of functionality. So what you can do as part of that, you can do your filtering, you can sort data, you can do joins. You've got most of what you can do in SQL is available as part of FetchXML. So really, if you've got some more advanced requirements, you want to do things such as involving aggregations, you want to do that on the platform level instead of having to worry about doing it in Power BI, then potentially FetchXML could be a really good option for you to consider. However, it's not going to be a straightforward option. You're going to have some knowledge of how to work with M query code, Power Query code to be able to do it. And really, having that familiarity with FetchXML is going to be crucial. But potentially, as I say, if you're in a situation where you've been using Dynamics CRM previously, you've got an existing catalog or library of FetchXML queries, this could be a really good option to help you along. And something that will help you along in this regard is that you've got a fantastic tool within the XRM toolbox to help you along. It's called the Power Query M Builder. It's been built out by Mohammed Rashid and the CRM chart guy. His blog is definitely worth a look if you're doing anything to do with charts in CRM. He's done a lot of really great content on that. So what you can do with this tool is you can generate your own code snippets that you can then quickly and straightforwardly copy across into Power BI. It integrates alongside other tools in the FETCHXML toolbox, such as the FETCHXML builder. So you can build your FETCHXML queries without necessarily needing to know, the underlying intricacies of the language. And it's got some nice additional options to help generate option set labels, OData queries, and things like that. A really great tool. So I would recommend that you check that out if you're having a look, if you're doing it. And what we'll do now is we'll take a look at the Common Data Service Connector, what that can do, and then check out this XRM Toolbox tool as well. Right, so we're in Power BI Desktop then at the moment. So just create a blank report from here. So in order to connect up using the Common Data Service Connector, we first of all go to Get Data down here, click on More. We then get a list of all the possible data sources we can connect to. If we just search for Common Data Service or Common Data, we can see we've got the connector up on there. We just click on Connect. We pop in our server URL first of all, so it's the same one as we used before. It's my little test instance. Then we've got two really important options down here. So I would always recommend you set these to true. Otherwise, this one will just drive you mad otherwise, because otherwise the columns will just return in a completely random order. Set that to true. Then this one will also bring back friendly display values for your option sets and things like that. So similar to what we saw in the data flow a few minutes ago. So again, just put true in there. Always have true for both those options. It will make things really nice and easy for you. So click on OK. It's going to ask me to sign in using my organizational account. Just go across to another window to get that logged in. Click on Connect. Okay, so it's reading the data from our CDS instance. And similar to the data flow, it's going to have those two folders again. So again, ignore the system folder. You'll thank me later for that. And again, we're just going to do the same thing as before. We're just going to add on our account entity. We're going to add on our contact. We get a preview of the data in the window across there, which is really nice. Click on lead as well. Excuse me. And if we want to just load the data in and not do any additional modeling on it, we can do. In this case, just going to click transform data. It's going to open the Power Query editor for us once it's downloaded everything. Just on the other window, so just expand that on there. And we can see we get a fairly similar experience to what we saw online with data flows. So for example, option set values are returned in a fairly nice way. We've got all the different fields in a nice different order and things like that. So that's really good. So again, we could just click close and apply at this particular point. It's going to grab in all the data from these entities. And once it's done that, if we wanted to, maybe, okay, we're going to grab a table, add a table icon onto there. Let's just plonk on a couple of different fields, like so. Don't think there's any. There should be some account data in there. There's probably not any fields in there. Let's try the contact entity instead. Let's try full name. Yep, full name for the contact. Yep, so that gets it all back down there. So we can have it as a table visual, maybe convert it to a pie chart if we wanted to. Too much data there for it to show. Maybe a bar chart or something like that. But yeah, the data's in there and we can actually start doing the work in terms of getting a more meaningful report built out. If we wanted to go down using the FetchXML route and using the XRM toolbox, little tool that we've got. So first of all, what we do is we go into we download XRM toolbox. We add on our tool, our Power Query Builder tool on this tab on here. This is already being connected up to my environment down here. We click on the Load Entities button. So again, let's say, okay, we wanted to get data from the account entity. We click on that first of all. What's quite useful with this is that if we've got an existing view that's been built out in CDS that's got all the data in that we need, we can just select that. So for example, let's say, okay, the active accounts view, yeah, we quite like that. click on that straight away, we get through the exact fields that we want as part of that. And then what we can do is once we're happy that we've got our entity and our fields that we want, we can just generate the ODATA query like so. We can also generate our option sets based on the data we selected and the option set selected in which case, so we can just ignore that. And we can also generate our service URLs that we want to use as well based on the instance. So we go to our OData query down here. I just want to grab that particular query down there, copy that onto my clipboard, and then go to edit queries down here. I just do a new blank query down here. I'll just call this FETCHXML test advanced editor. Copy and paste this on here. Click on the done icon. We're going to have to add the service root URL onto that, which is why it was generated earlier. So let's just check that on there. It's a service root URL, so I'll just replace this for the purpose of this demo. I'll just replace this with the instance name. So dynamics.com, I think it is. We'll just check the toolbox. Yep. We'll need to just add that little bit onto the end of it. Just grab that like so. Click done. It's going to ask me for my credentials. So far, so good. So it's going to be an organizational account again that we want to connect up to with that. Click on that. There we go. We get our account data in there. It's in, it's a very condensed view of the data that we need. And if we need to modify it further, we can do. So, for example, if we wanted to expand out all the details about the primary contact record, we can do so. Or, fix the nulls or do further work on there. So yeah, that was how you start to get to work with the Common Data Service Connector in Power BI Desktop and also the mQuery XML toolbox, Power Query Builder app. Okay, so moving on now and looking at our another way in which you can use CDS data alongside Power BI is using something called the data export service. So what you can do with the CDS database is that you can actually synchronize it out into a SQL Server database hosted out in Azure. So by doing this, you've got the ability then to have full control over how you query and access that data. You can start to use things such as direct query to help speed you along. And if you're in a situation where you're happy with just a near real-time view of your data, this is a great option to consider. And you can very much fine-tune the performance of that database to suit your particular reporting needs or requirements. Having said that, it's not an easy thing to sort of set up. It does require you to have some commitment towards Azure, both from an infrastructure and from a billing standpoint. There will be some limitations in terms of what you can synchronize out. And you're going to have a good understanding as well in terms of how CDS handles, how underlying data types in CDS work. But really, if you're in a situation where you've got, quite extensive Transact SQL skills within your team, or you've got a potentially more complex reporting solution you need to deploy out, this is something definitely worth consideration. So in terms of setting it up then, how it all works is it's effectively just a free add-on solution. So if you've got an existing Power Apps or Dynamics 365 subscription, you can get this, for no additional charge on top of it. We've sort of discussed already what it does. Lets you sync data out into either a single Azure SQL database or a full-blown SQL Server instance that you've got on a Windows virtual machine. It's important to keep in mind that this is a one-way sync of the data. So don't be thinking that you can just get the data out into SQL, and do things such as bulk updating your data via an update query or inserting data, things like that. No, it's just a one-way sync, your read-only copy of your data. And the setup steps involved, there's quite a few steps involved. Sort of try to summarize them here on the slides. You have to do some setup in Azure, various different resources that need to set up as part of that. You install the managed solution into your environment. you then have to define your profile for exporting your data, basically just a list of entities that you want to sync out. Once that's all done, it starts off doing a metadata sync first of all, getting all the details about your tables and the fields and things like that. It does an initial push of all the data in your system, which can take a while depending on the size of your CDS instance. And then from there, it's doing continuous delta syncs behind the scenes. So what I would say is, if you're in a situation where you just need to get you know, data out just for a more enhanced reporting application, or even if you just want to do a very quick and easy disaster recovery solution involving CDS, this is a great solution to look at, and it saves you having to look at tools such as Kingsway Soft or Scribe Online, which have potentially much more higher monetary costs to them when you start looking at those. So if you're interested to find out more about how to set up the data export service, then the business applications MVP Scott Duro has got a fantastic blog post here, which I've linked to. He summarizes it far better than I can do, and Scott is just generally just worth a follow anyway, so always good just to give him a bit of a shout out. So yeah, go check out his blog if you're interested in finding out more. So I mentioned some of the oddities in terms of how CDS data is handled. We can see this sort of in action when we look at how option sets and status reason values are synced out into the database. So option sets are basically your drop-down fields, so being able to select from a pick list a particular option. Status and status reason value, so all records in CDS you must give it a status, either active or inactive, and then underneath that you can then define status reason values underneath that. So for active, you could have pending, started, whatever. For inactive, you could have completed, failed, etc. Those are the sort of types of status reason values that you can do. But when we get these out into SQL, we can see we don't actually get anything that looks particularly readable. Instead, we get what are called the underlying option set values. And these are integer values stored within Dynamics or 365 or CDS database. So this, looking at it, is not much use to anyone. I can't tell what the job title is for either Andrew or Jane or whatever. So what I could potentially look at doing is, okay, I can run a bit of a slightly more complicated query on here to get the option set values and tag that on at the end. I have to do multiple joins as part of that to get that, potentially not a nice one to sort of do. Interestingly as well, I also need to make sure that I'm selecting the correct localized label for the language that we're targeting. So in this case, 1033 is for the English language. So potentially I'm going to have to, okay, if I've got French or German or whoever different language users in my instance, I'm going to have to write specific queries to do that. So potentially these queries could get quite long and quite complex. So what you can do instead to help you along, you can create a little function that you can call. So the code for this is sort of written out on there, and this basically just takes what we saw in the previous slide and encapsulates it into something that you can then call as part of your select statement. So all you do is you just pass in the name of your option set field, its underlying value, then the language code, and then it returns the data in pretty much the same sort of shape as we saw earlier. So the code for this is on the slide on here. It's also on the GitHub page, so feel free to, if it's going to be helpful, just download it and deploy it out to your environment if you want. Okay, so a couple of things just to remember about the data export service. So similar to what we saw with the CDS connector earlier, record lookup, so it will be stored as GUID values, and this is also the same for your owner ID fields. So you're going to have to be prepared to do some joins to get information in, friendly description values in for those data types if that's your requirement. You've got some additional tables which the data export service spits out for you. Details are on there, but potentially those could be quite useful. So if you need to figure out, okay, who's deleting what records, what entity attributes are we syncing out, all of this is stored in these tables on here, so they could be potentially quite useful for you. Now, Microsoft recommends that you should be using a P1 Premium database as your SQL database for this. It's not a strict requirement, it's just a recommendation. I've had the solution working on standard Azure SQL databases just fine. Again, it really just depends on how often you're querying the database and what type of, how big your reporting application is. And if the cost is potentially an issue, then this is where you can look at tools such as Azure Automation to automatically scale up your database and scale it back down during core hours or when performance level hits a particular threshold. And what I would ultimately say is, okay, this is your database. You're bringing your own database to the party on here. So provided you're not tinkering about with anything that the data export service is responsible for, so the tables I mentioned, entity tables, stuff like that, there's nothing stopping you from bolting on additional features or functionality to help meet your particular requirements. So, so feel free to go in and do that, but just be prudent around, okay, don't be touching stuff that data export service relies on, so core tables and things like that. So let's take a look now in terms of, okay, how a typical experience querying the data export service database looks from within Power BI. Okay, so in our final demo today, we're going to take a look at how you connect up to and query data that's been synchronized out to a data export service database on Azure. So same as before, as we saw earlier in Power BI Desktop, we just go to get data, go to SQL Server. It's worth noting these steps will also be the same for if you're doing a data flow online. So that is also an acceptable option to look at for this. So we need to pop in details regarding our particular server over here. So the name of the server, our database down here. We want to use direct query. So import will just basically grab all the data, pull it in. You'll then have to schedule refresh it once it's deployed out to the Power BI online service. Direct query will be every time you refresh and open the report, it will query the database directly. So that's one of the benefits of using SQL Server as a data source. CDS doesn't support direct query at the moment. So with those options clicked and enabled, click OK down here. Usually it would prompt you for the login, but because I've already logged in and tested this already, it's let me straight in. So we can see at the moment what I've done is I've synced out currently the account and the contact and lead entities from our CDS over here. Also the relationship table, the many-to-many relationship table for account leads. So similar to before, I can just click on these, I can get a quick little preview of the data. And again, we're just going to pull in our account, contact, and lead data into our model. I'm going to open Power Query Editor so we can have a quick look at the data and how it all sort of renders. So, at the moment, so when the data is all brought in, it's not in a nicely filtered order, similar to what we saw with the other connector. So we're going to have to basically fiddle about with that to sort of figure it out. And again, it's got some of the issues that I mentioned earlier. So for example, our state code, status, and status code fields are returning just as the integers. So we're going to need to do some modeling there to get the correct values. If we scroll further along, we should start to see some lookup fields to other entities. So modified by, so that's going to be the unique identifier for the user who's modified that. So in which case you'd have to sync and bring down the user entity down there. But pretty much the same data that we saw previously is all on here. We can model it further if we need to. And as I say, the main benefit of this is that we can use direct query. We can get the data in straight away. We're not reliant on refreshing it constantly behind the scenes in Power BI. So yeah, so that is a quick demonstration there of how to connect up to a data export service database and how data looks once you bring it into Power BI. Okay, so the final option to consider, and it's not one that I'm going to go into too much detail about because you could literally do a whole presentation just on this particular feature, but it's worth mentioning anyway, so you can consider it. Something it's fairly new. You can now export out the CDS data to a Azure data lake. So really, data lakes are perhaps, if you've done any work with sort of machine learning or big data processing, this is where data lakes potentially come into the mix, or where you've basically just got gigabytes or potentially terabytes of data that you need to process. So what you can do is similar to the data export service, you can push out this data into your data lake. It's got the same sort of features and benefits. So basically, all your create, update, delete operations, near real time, potentially a lot cheaper as well because you're only paying for what you use from the storage account point of view in Azure. But similar to what we discussed earlier, is that okay, it does require a infrastructure and billing commitment within Azure. You've got some limitations there around in terms of what entities are supported and some geographic and tenant restrictions. And really what I would say with this one is that I'll be completely frank with you, I haven't actually figured out the best way in which you can, consume this data from within Power BI. It's not exposed out in a really nice and easy to use way. So really, if you're used to working with data lake as a data source, and as I say, you need to meet those specific requirements that I've discussed about already, this is one to look at. But otherwise, yeah, it's probably going to be a little bit overkill for what you need. So what I thought I'd do is I'll just quickly talk through what the setup steps are involved. As I mentioned, you need to set up a storage account resource on Azure. So the screenshot here shows you the settings that you need to use as part of this. The location is very important. You need to make sure that it maps across to your tenant location for your CDS instance. So in this case, when I then go into CDS, into the Power Apps portal, and configure my data lake, I'm told up there, okay, here is where my environment is located. So be sure to check that first and to align your storage account accordingly to that particular region. So with that done, once you select your storage account within the Data Lake Wizard, you're then presented with a screen where you can then choose which entities that you want. So only entities that have been enabled for change tracking will appear on this list on here. Then with that done, it will then push the data out into there, and we can see an example on here for the account entity. It's pushed out data into primarily CSV format, but there's also quite some other data that it pushes out as well, which we'll sort of see in a minute. The thing to remember though is that if you start wanting to hook up into Power BI or indeed for any other application, start reading this data, make sure you grant your user account this role on the storage account. Even if you are an administrator on the subscription and you have full access to it, you won't be able to access the data in the blob storage account in the data lake until you granted yourself this role. So don't forget to do that. Then when it comes to querying the data in Power BI, this just shows you how the data comes back. And it's very strange. So you've got your various changes for your data. So for example, changes that are made in 2019 are in one CSV file, 2020 is in a separate CSV file. You've got JSON files which define the structure of your data and how it's sort of the various different attributes and the types and things like that. The CSV files won't have any headers on them at all. So you're going to have to basically figure out and get the data in, figure out what the headers are based on the other files that are included on here. And as I mentioned already, I've not found a straightforward or an easy way in which you can consolidate this together and query it in a simple fashion. Answer on a postcard if you figured it out, because I really would like to know how you can use this in Power BI. But at the moment, it's really complicated and not too clear. I mention it just for completeness, really. It is an option for you to consider, but really it's on the far end in terms of, okay, when you've got when you're working with big data and you know you've exhausted all other options, really. This is when you probably want to look at this. So in closing, then probably a question that you probably would ask me. Okay, what is the best way to consume CDS data in Power BI? Well, my sort of confession is that I quite like working with SQL. SQL is a really nice language when you wanted to query and shape data. So really, for me, having data in a SQL database that I can then query does make it easier. Not just perhaps for me, but for those who've got a traditional, background, BI, business intelligence background. SQL is going to be the way to go. But really, what I would say around this, okay, fine, you might be an expert in SQL, but you're still going to have to spend some time learning how CDS handles various different data types and relationships. We've discussed some of the oddities already in the talk in this presentation today. So you're going to have to spend some time ultimately learning about how CDS does those things. Really now, though, we're quite fortunate. The Common Data Service Connector is in a sort of place now where it's got some really nice options built in as part of it, which we've seen as part of today's presentation. So really use that first. If you're just starting out and you're unsure where to begin, use the Common Data Service Connector. Again, for more advanced requirements, SQL is definitely the way to go. And then, data lake route, okay, if you've got a real focus on the costs and you're in the fortunate position where you've been able to figure out how the hell all this data, all the files and how you all link it together, how all that works, then yeah, by all means go for that as well. But really, Common Data Service Connector, you won't go far wrong with that these days. So in closing then, I think we're quite fortunate where we are today. It's easy. We're far more easier now to start using Power BI along CDS. So really the argument then alongside that is that you've got no excuse not to have it as your first preference tool when you need to start developing reports off the back of Dynamics 365 or CDS. But really, just connecting Power BI up to CDS. Okay, yep, that's probably the easy part. Really, the difficulty will be is figuring out how CDS handles the various data types. We discussed this already today. So really going away, doing your research, understanding how CDS works, how entities work, how the various different fields work, how relationships work, you're going to have to do that. And by doing that, it's going to help you along a lot when you're starting to build out your first Power BI report involving CDS. I'd also say as well, if you're just starting out in Power BI in your organization and you're thinking about, okay, well, what's the, how are we going to get this ultimately rolled out? What are our requirements in terms of sharing and things like that? Um, really having a good grasp of the licensing before you start developing or investing a lot in terms of building reports out is going to be really useful. So, fully understand, read up, and be clear in terms of which license you're going to need to suit the requirements of the business. And something just to consider, sort of alluded to at the start of the talk, really, but always remember CDS and Dynamics 365, Dynamics CRM, they are the same thing. Therefore, by association, any solution that works for Dynamics CRM and Dynamics 365, chances are it will also work for CDS. So when you're doing your research, when you're evaluating the different options that are sort of available, keep that in mind, and when you sort of, opening Google for the 60th time of the day, like I do, just make sure that when you're searching for potential solutions or doing your research that you've got your appropriate search terms modeled correctly so you can get the benefit and find out about all of the solutions that are available, not just ones that, that may be limited based on just searching for CDS. So in terms of additional resources to help you along, if you're just starting out with the Power Platform with CDS, then I really would recommend you to get the Power Apps Community Plan. Gives you a free personal environment, including a CDS database and a Power Apps license, so you can very quickly start to experiment and work with the platform. Really, nothing's going to beat actually sitting down and spending some time just building just a sample application, creating some fields, creating some views, doing all that stuff is going to be really helpful in increasing your knowledge. And if you are looking at ways in which you can sort of self study modules, Microsoft got some really great learning paths now on the Learn website. So I've highlighted some of the ones here that target Power BI and Common Data Service. Definitely check these out. They'll cover the latest content and they'll get you up to speed quickly and hopefully have some good examples for you to go away and look at. Finally, I've also blogged quite extensively around Power BI, the various connectors as well. I've done a whole series on one of the exams for Power BI, exam 70779. Yeah, if you are interested in finding out more about what Power BI can do, how it fits alongside Dynamics 365 or CDS, then by all means check out these posts as well. What leaves me to say is thank you very much for watching today. I hope this has been really useful. If you're interested and want to see more videos in the future, then please subscribe to the channel. Try and get videos out fairly often. You can also contact me on here if you've got any questions or leave a comment below. Be more than happy to sort of help you out with anything to do with the Power Platform, CDS or Dynamics 365. So all it leaves me to say is have a good day. Cheers.